Kura's Vex heard it first as a vibration in her claws. Her console hummed at a frequency no transponder should make, a low, steady tone that lived in the bone rather than the ear. She had pulled 214 vessels from the dark. None of them had hummed back. The Claw of Evening was 12 meters of welded hull and patched seals, held together by work her grandfather had done before she was born. Kuraz sat in the pilot's cradle, 4 claws wrapped around the yoke, her feathered crest flat against her skull. The boneyard stretched around her, a debris field orbiting a dead neutron star, 14 light-years beyond the last outpost anyone called home. Ships died here and did not rot. That was the Salvager's promise. The hum stopped. Kuraz waited. She had learned to wait. At 87 years, patience was not a virtue but a trade skill. She keyed the receiver again. Nothing. Then the tone returned not from her console but from the ship itself. A human ship. 2.3 kilometers of dark alloy, no heat signature, no running lights, micrometeorite scars across its spine like claw marks. The dorsal tower had been sheared at an angle that suggested something had struck it hard long ago. She circled it twice. The registry was wrong. EDS 7741, Earth Defense Ship. A prefix abolished 3 centuries ago, not since the realignment. Kuraz felt her claws tremble. Thin oil slicked her console, a biological tell she could not control, the Thren stress response her kind had never evolved away from. She wiped it with her forelimb and sent the drone. The airlock cycled with a sound like a dying breath. The drone camera swept the bridge. Dust covered everything. Shadows pooled in the corners where no light had reached for 3 centuries. The captain's chair sat empty, its restraints hanging loose. And in the holder beside it she saw a coffee cup, white ceramic, a chip on the handle. The liquid inside had long since dried to a brown stain. Kuraz leaned forward. Her viewport fogged slightly from the oil still secreting from her glands. She had seen 1,000 dead bridges. None of them had coffee cups. The lights blazed on. Every console across the bridge flickered to life at once. Displays lit in script she did not recognize, human military code, obsolete for 3 centuries. The drone's camera whited out for a half-second, then adjusted, and a voice filled the bridge speakers, calm, slightly amused, male. "Captain, welcome back." The captain had been dead for 312 years. Kuraz sat very still. The voice did not repeat itself. It simply hung in the dead ship's air, waiting for an answer that would never come. She checked the drone's thermal feed. The bridge was still cold. No heat signature anywhere. The ship was dead. The ship was speaking. She pulled the drone back. Her claws left wet marks on the console. She opened a channel to Cradle Point, the human outpost 14 light-years away, population 847, a settlement so small the Galactic Concord barely listed it. She did not know who else to call. "This is Kuraz Vex, salvage charter transmitting from Sector 19 Delta. I have found a vessel. Registry EDS 7741. Requesting contact with any human authority." She paused. Her crest rose slightly, then flattened again. "The ship is speaking." She sent the transmission, then she waited. 72 hours earlier, Kuraz had been drinking thin broth in her cramped galley, watching the boneyard drift past her viewport. The neutron star at the field's center was a pinprick of compressed light, no larger than her claw tip, burning with a gravity that bent time. She had been coming here for 41 years. The boneyard never changed. Ships arrived, ships died, ships sat in the dark waiting for someone patient enough to cut them free. Her father had taught her the first rule of salvage. Some ships do not want to be found. He had meant it literally. Thren oral history was full of vessels that hummed in frequencies no receiver could parse, of hulls that sealed themselves when cutters approached, of salvage crews that boarded and never transmitted again. Kuraz had treated these stories the way she treated gravity, a fact of existence, neither believed nor disbelieved, simply accounted for. The Resolute was the 215th. She had found it on her third sweep of the outer debris ring, where the neutron star's gravity pulled metal into slow, decaying orbits. The hull was intact enough to hold pressure. The registry was intact enough to read. Everything else about it was wrong. Now in the present her console chimed. A response from Cradle Point. Kuraz opened the channel. The face that appeared was human, female, young by human standards, perhaps 30 years. Dark skin, close-cropped hair, the gray uniform of something called Earth Navy. The insignia on her collar meant nothing to Kuraz. The woman's eyes meant everything. They widened. Then they went very still. "Say again," the human said. "Registry." EDS 7741. The silence lasted 14 seconds. Kuraz counted them. She had never seen a human be silent for 14 seconds. Humans talked. They filled space with words the way Thren filled it with oil. This one simply stared at her screen, her jaw tight, her hands out of frame. "Do not board that ship again," the human said finally. Her voice was flat, controlled. "Do not tell anyone else we are coming." The channel closed. Kuraz sat in her pilot's cradle, the console still slick beneath her claws. The dead ship hung in her viewport, dark and patient. She thought of the coffee cup. She thought of the voice. She thought of the 14 seconds of silence and what kind of weight could press a human's words flat like that. Her transmitter chimed again. Not Cradle Point. The signal bore the bronze seal of the Vorkai Salvage Directorate. "Unlicensed salvager Kuraz Vex. You have entered a contested zone. Vacate within 18 cycles or forfeit your charter." Kuraz looked at the seal. She looked at the dead ship. She thought of the voice saying welcome back to a captain who had been dead for 3 centuries. And she thought of the human woman who had told her not to tell anyone, and now someone else already knew. She did not answer the Vorkai transmission. She sat in her cradle, her claws trembling, her console fogging with oil, and she waited for whatever came next. The human ship arrived in 60 hours. Not from Cradle Point, from somewhere deeper in human space, a vessel Kuraz did not recognize. Smaller than the Resolute, faster. It matched her orbit without asking permission and sent a single tight beam transmission. "Open your airlock. Lieutenant Mara Okonkwo, Earth Navy. We need to talk." Kuraz opened the lock. She had learned long ago that when humans said, "We need to talk," they meant "I need to tell you something you will not believe." Okonkwo was taller than she looked on screen. Her uniform was pressed with a precision that suggested she had slept in it. She carried a small case, metal, sealed, the kind of container that held things worth more than ships. She did not sit. She stood in Kuraz's cramped galley, her back straight, her eyes moving across every surface as if cataloging threats. "You found the Resolute," Okonkwo said, "not a question." "I found a ship that speaks to dead men." Okonkwo's jaw tightened. She set the case on Kuraz's table and opened it. Inside lay a single data chip. The label was handwritten in a script Kuraz could not read, but the symbols had the weight of something old, something hidden. "The dormant," Okonkwo said. "Long silence protocol, eyes only." Kuraz looked at the chip. She looked at the human. "Your captain has been dead for 3 centuries. "Captain Elias Vance," Okonkwo said. "He died in the Quiet War. The Resolute died with him. That is what the Conquered Registry says. That is what every history file says." She paused. Her hands rested on the case, not touching the chip. "The registry is wrong." Kuraz felt her claws tremble again. She did not wipe the oil this time. "How many?" Okonkwo met her eyes. 12. 12 ships, officially destroyed in the Quiet War. Actually hidden across worthless sectors, waiting in the dark for someone foolish enough to wake them. Kuraz thought of her father's stories. She thought of the voice on the bridge. She thought of the coffee cup, still sitting in its holder, the stain still dark after 3 centuries. "Why tell me?" "Because you transmitted," Okonkwo said. "Because the ship answered you. Because the long silence protocol was built for one thing: to wait until the right person called. She leaned forward. Her voice dropped to something almost private. We do not return until we are called. We do not call ourselves. We wait. The words were not hers. Kuraz heard it in the rhythm, in the weight of each syllable. Okonkwo was quoting something, or someone. Who said that? Okonkwo closed the case. She did not answer. She looked out Kuraz's viewport at the dead ship hanging in the dark, and for a moment the young human's face held the same expression Kuraz had seen in the 14-second silence, the look of someone staring at a door they had hoped would stay closed. The Vorkai filed their 47th petition last cycle, Okonkwo said quietly. They want this sector. They want every sector beyond the rim, and they believe their entire civilization believes that the dormant are a myth invented to block their claims. She turned back to Kuraz. You just proved them wrong. You proved it with a transmission they intercepted. In 18 cycles, they will arrive with a ship that has guns instead of petitions. Kuraz looked at her console. The bronze seal still glowed on her screen. 18 cycles. She thought of the voice saying welcome back. She thought of the coffee cup and the stain and the 3 centuries of waiting. What does the ship want? Okonkwo's hand closed around the data chip. The ship wants what it has always wanted, to protect what we left behind. She paused. Her thumb brushed the chip's edge. And now it knows someone is listening. Outside, the Resolute drifted. No lights, no heat. But Kuraz watched it through her viewport, and she knew with the certainty of a species that had spent 6,000 years learning to wait, that the ship was not dead. It was only quiet. And quiet, she was learning, was not the same thing as gone. I wish I could tell you it ended there. It didn't. Stay close. Okonkwo did not sleep in the 60 hours before the Vorkai ship arrived. Kuraz knew this because she watched the human's vessel through her viewport, its running lights never dimming, its airlock never cycling. The lieutenant sat inside with her data chip and her silence, and Kuraz sat in her own cradle with the oil drying on her console, and neither of them spoke. The boneyard turned slowly around its dead star. Kuraz watched debris drift past, a hull fragment from something Thren, a cargo container still sealed, a solar panel bent into a shape that suggested violence. She had catalogued this field for 41 years. She knew every major wreck by the pattern of its scars. The Resolute was different. The Resolute had no scars that matched its death. The dorsal shear was old. The micrometeorite pitting was older. But the ship itself was intact, sealed, pressurized, waiting. She sent the drone back. She told herself she was checking for hull breaches. She was lying. The bridge looked the same: dust, shadows, the coffee cup in its holder. But now Kuraz noticed something she had missed before: a second chair, smaller, against the far wall. An engineer's station. On its console, a handwritten note in a script she could not read, the ink faded to the color of old bone. Beside it, a stylus, the kind humans used for maintenance logs. She zoomed the camera. The note was short, 4 lines. She ran it through her translator, but the software choked on the handwriting: too irregular, too old. One word came through, repeated twice: home. Home. Kuraz pulled the drone back. Her claws left new wet marks on the yoke. The Vorkai ship arrived on schedule. It was 800 meters of bronze hull and gun emplacements, the kind of vessel that filed claims with its weapons rather than its paperwork. Director Koreth's voice came over the general channel before the ship even matched orbit, a flat, clicking tone. The Vorkai language translated into syllables that sounded like mandibles snapping shut. Salvager Kuraz Vex, you are in violation of Charter Section 7, Subsection 14. Vacate this zone immediately. The claim is filed. The claim is final. Kuraz looked at Okonkwo's ship. It had not moved. Its lights still burned. She opened a private channel. They have guns, she said. They always have guns, Okonkwo replied. Her voice was calm, too calm. They have had guns for 80 years. What they do not have is proof. Proof of what? That we were here first. The channel went quiet. Kuraz watched the Vorkai vessel settle into a blocking position between her ship and the Resolute. Its gun emplacements tracked slowly across the debris field, not aiming at anything, simply announcing their presence. The message was clear. This was not a negotiation. This was a lock. Kuraz thought of the coffee cup. She thought of the voice. She thought of the note saying *home twice, as if repetition could make it true. She opened the general channel. Director Korath, this ship is not salvage. It is a registered military vessel under Earth Defense Ship Prefix. The prefix predates your charter. A pause, the clicking resumed faster now. The prefix is abolished, the registry is void, the ship is debris. The ship spoke, Kuraz said. The clicking stopped. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then Korath's voice returned lower, the translation flatter. Ships do not speak, Salvager. You are deluded, or you are lying. In either case, you have 17 cycles remaining. The channel closed. Kuraz sat in her cradle, her crest fully flattened now, her console slick with fresh oil. She had made a mistake. She had spoken the truth to a species that built its empire on paperwork, and the truth was not a document they could file. She found Okonkwo in her own airlock, suited, helmet under her arm. The human's face was pale. Her hands were steady. I'm going across, Okonkwo said. To the Resolute. To the bridge. The data chip has a code, an 8-digit sequence. It was meant for Vance's second-in-command, but Vance is dead and his second-in-command is dust. She looked at Kuraz. The ship answered you. That means something. What? I don't know, but the protocol was built for contingency. For the world we have now, not the world they left. Okonkwo pulled her helmet on. Her voice came through the suit's speaker, tinny and close. The long silence was never about hiding. It was about waiting for someone who would listen instead of conquer. Kuraz watched her cycle through the airlock. The human suit was standard Navy issue, gray, unmarked. The kind that said I belong to something larger than myself *. Kuraz had never belonged to anything larger than her ship. She wondered if that was why the Resolute had answered her, because she had no flag to raise, no claim to file, only ears and patience and the willingness to sit in the dark until something spoke back. She patched the drone feed to her main screen and watched Okonkwo cross the gap. The human moved carefully along the Resolute's hull, magnetic boots finding purchase on scarred alloy. The ship was massive up close. 2.3 kilometers meant nothing until you watched a single human figure crawl across its spine like a speck of dust on a mountain. Okonkwo reached the dorsal airlock, the one Kuraz's drone had found cycling, and punched a manual override. The lock opened. Okonkwo stepped inside. Kuraz lost visual contact. The drone could not follow through the ship's interior, too many turns, too much metal blocking signal. She switched to audio, static, then breathing, then footsteps distant and hollow, ringing on decks that had not carried weight for 3 centuries. The corridor is clear, Okonkwo whispered. Her voice shook slightly. Lights are on. The ship knew I was coming. Kuraz leaned forward. The bridge. Heading there now. Silence, longer than the 14 seconds from cradle point. Kuraz counted her own heartbeats, a Thren rhythm, faster than human, 4-chambered and anxious. She reached 60. She reached 90. Then Okonkwo's voice returned, different, hushed, awe and fear mixed into something Kuraz had no word for. It's warm. What? The bridge, it's 3 degrees above background. The consoles are running, the coffee cup, a pause, static. The coffee cup is still here, the stain is still wet. Kuraz felt her claws tremble so hard they rattled against her console. Wet. After 3 centuries. The ship was not dead. The ship had never been dead. It had been waiting in a way that looked like death, hibernating at the edge of existence, maintaining just enough warmth to keep its memory alive. The code, Kuraz said, Enter the code. More static. Then a series of tones, Okonkwo punching keys, 8 digits in a sequence Kuraz could not hear. The feed went dead for 2 full seconds. Then the voice returned, not through Kuraz's console, through Okonkwo's suit radio. The same calm, slightly amused male voice, but different now, fuller, as if it had been sleeping and was only now truly waking. "Captain," the voice said, "welcome back." "I'm not the captain," Okonkwo whispered. "I know," the voice said, "but you brought the code and you brought a witness." Kuraz sat very still. Her viewport showed the Vorkai ship, silent and patient, its guns still tracking the debris field. Her screen showed static where Okonkwo's feed had been, and in her ears, through the tinny speaker, she heard the voice of a dead man speaking to a living woman about a witness neither of them had named. "Who is the witness?" Okonkwo asked. The voice did not answer. Instead, something new came through the static, a rhythmic sound, soft, almost lost beneath the interference. Tapping fingers on metal, or on something harder. A pattern Kuraz almost recognized, then didn't, then felt in her bones rather than her ears. "Captain Vance," the voice said, and now there was weight beneath the amusement, something ancient and sorrowful. "He left a second recording, for whoever came after. Would you like to hear it?" Okonkwo's breathing was loud in the silence. "Yes." "Then listen close. We do not return until we are called. We do not call ourselves. We wait, and we remember." The tapping grew louder. Kuraz realized it was not random. It was a code. A message in rhythm, the kind sailors had used before radios, before light-speed delay, before the Concord had drawn its lines across the stars. She did not know the pattern, but she knew what it meant. The ship was not alone. The ship had never been alone. She looked at her console. The Vorkai seal still glowed. 17 cycles. She looked at her viewport. The Resolute hung in the dark, no lights visible from outside, but warm now, 3 degrees above the void, a heartbeat in a body that had been still for 3 centuries. And she looked at the static on her screen, where a human woman stood in a dead man's chair, listening to a voice that should not exist, and she understood something that changed the shape of her fear. The quiet war had not been a defeat, it had been a choice. Humans had not disappeared. They had simply learned to wait in a way that no other species understood. Not the Vorkai with their petitions, not the Thren with their patience, not the Conquered with its 6,000 years of charters and claims. Humanity had built something that could not be targeted because it could not be found. And now, because one salvager had heard a hum that wasn't supposed to exist, the waiting was ending. Kuraz wiped her console with her forelimb. The oil was thick now, pooling in the grooves of her controls. She did not care. She opened a channel to Okonkwo's suit, private, tight beam, something the Vorkai could not intercept. "What happens now?" Okonkwo's voice came back different, younger. The weight was still there, but something else had joined it, hope, or its cousin, terror. "Now," Okonkwo said, "we find out if the others are still listening too." "The other 11. The other 11. Kuraz looked at the Vorkai ship. Its guns had stopped tracking. They were aimed now, not at her, at the Resolute, at the ship that had just proven it was not debris, not salvage, not a myth invented to block expansion, at the ship that had spoken. And in the silence that followed, Kuraz heard something new, a second hum, deeper than the first, coming from somewhere beyond the debris field. Another ship, or another voice, or the sound of a galaxy beginning to remember that some silences were not empty. She sat in her cradle, her claws trembling, her console slick, her heart beating 4-chambered and fast. The boneyard turned. The dead star burned. And something that had been waiting for 3 centuries was finally waking up. The second hum was not a ship, it was a voice. Kuraz patched the signal through her console, filtering out the neutron star's background radiation, the debris field's metallic chatter, the Vorkai vessel's low-power scanning pulse. What remained was a tone, single, steady, coming from no fixed point. It rose and fell in a pattern that matched the tapping from Vance's recording. A call. An answer. Okonkwo's voice crackled through the private channel. "You hear that?" "I hear it. It's not the Resolute. The Resolute's frequency is different. This is a pause, static. This is another one." Kuraz looked at her viewport. The boneyard stretched in every direction, thousands of hulls, millions of fragments, a graveyard the size of a solar system. 12 ships hidden across worthless sectors, and now 2 of them were speaking. "How many more?" Kuraz asked. "We don't know, we never knew. The dormant registry listed coordinates, but the long silence was designed to drift, to hide, to become part of the noise." Okonkwo's breathing was audible close in the speaker. "The Resolute was the only one we had a fix on. The others could be anywhere or everywhere." The Vorkai channel opened without warning. Koreth's clicking voice translated flat and cold. "Salvager, your companion has boarded a vessel in violation of contested zone protocol. This is grounds for immediate charter revocation." Kuraz did not answer. She watched the Vorkai ship's gun emplacements. They had stopped tracking. Now they were aimed, not at the Resolute, at Okonkwo's vessel, at the Claw of Evening, at her. "Director Korath," she said, "the ship is warm, the ship is speaking. Your paperwork does not cover this." "The ship is debris," Korath said. "Debris does not speak. Debris does not warm. You are experiencing sensor malfunction, or you are lying. In either case, you have 16 cycles." The channel closed. Kuraz looked at her console. 16 cycles. She looked at the Resolute, dark and patient, 3 degrees above the void. She looked at the second hum, still sounding through her speakers, still answering a call that had begun 3 centuries ago. She made a decision. She opened a channel she had never used, a frequency reserved for conquered emergencies, the kind of call that brought arbitrators and mediators and species who still believed in rules older than petitions. "Tethsoren," she said, "if you are listening, I need you." The Vali Elder arrived in 40 hours. His ship was small, a courier vessel, unarmed, the kind that carried memory rather than cargo. Tethsoren himself was ancient even by Vali standards, his skin the color of dried parchment, his eyes milky with cataracts that no surgery could correct. He had served on the conquered Charter Council for 2 centuries. He had watched the Quiet War end. He had watched humanity withdraw. He had filed the original dormant registry himself, in a chamber no one visited anymore, under a seal no one remembered. He came aboard the Claw of Evening without ceremony. He moved slowly, his joints stiff, his breath shallow. He sat in Kuraz's galley, the same galley where Okonkwo had stood with her data chip, and he looked at the Salvager with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. "You found one," he said, "not a question." "I found a ship that speaks." Tethsoren nodded. His hands, spotted and thin, rested on the table. "The Resolute, EDS 7741, Captain Elias Vance, Engineer Petrov, Lieutenant Okonkwo's great-great-grandmother served as navigator." He paused. His voice was soft, almost lost beneath the ship's ambient hum. "I filed the registry. I watched the ships disappear. I thought I would die before anyone found them." Kuraz felt her claws tremble. She did not wipe the oil. Why hide them? Because the Quiet War was not a war. Tethsoren looked out the viewport at the Resolute, at the Vorkai ship, at the second hum still sounding through the dark. It was a conversation. The Vorkai wanted territory. Humanity wanted time. The conquered wanted peace. And someone, Vance, I think, though I never met him, suggested a third option. Disappear. Wait. Build something that could not be destroyed because it could not be found. A fleet in the dark. A voice that would answer when the right question was asked. The right question being, "Captain, welcome back." Tethsoren smiled. It was a sad expression full of wrinkles. Not a command, a greeting, an invitation. The ship was programmed to respond to anyone who approached with patience rather than conquest, anyone who listened before claiming. Kuraz thought of her 214 previous vessels. She thought of how many she had cut apart without asking their names. She thought of the coffee cup, still sitting in its holder, the stain still wet after 3 centuries. "The Vorkai will not accept this," she said. "The Vorkai cannot process it." Teth Soren reached into his robe and withdrew a document, old, physical, paper rather than data. The Conquered Charter, original copy, signed in ink by species that no longer existed. This is the claim that predates their petitions. The dormant registry, filed under Section 1 of the original charter. The Vorkai expansion is built on the assumption that humanity abandoned these sectors. They did not abandon them. They entrusted them to time. He held the document out. Kuraz did not take it. She was looking at her console at a new signal threading through the static, not the second hum, not the Resolute, something else. A transmission from the Vorkai ship, encrypted, directed not at her but at something beyond the debris field. "They're calling for reinforcements," she said. Teth Soren did not move. "They always do. When the paperwork fails, they send guns. It is their nature." "How long?" "For a military vessel to arrive from Vorkai space, 4 days, perhaps 5. The old Vali folded the charter and returned it to his robe. "But they will not wait for reinforcements. Director Koreth has filed 47 petitions in his career. 0 have been approved for contested zones. This is his chance to prove that the dormant are a myth. If he waits for reinforcements, he admits doubt. And doubt is the one thing his species cannot file." Kuraz stood. Her legs were stiff from sitting. She moved to the viewport and pressed her claws against the glass, leaving thin oil marks. The Resolute hung in the dark, unchanged, patient. But now she saw it differently, not as salvage, not as debris, as a promise. A message in metal and silence, left by people who had believed, truly believed, that someone would eventually come who would listen rather than take. "The tapping," she said. "In Vance's recording, what is it?" Teth Soren's voice came from behind her, soft and old. "Morse code, an ancient human signaling system. Petrov taught it to the crew. He believed that even if the ship's systems failed, even if the voice recordings degraded, the rhythm would remain, a heartbeat in the dark." He paused. "The message is simple. It says, 'We are here. We remember. We wait for you.'" Kuraz closed her eyes. She felt the hum in her bones, the Resolute's frequency, the second voice, the tapping that had been sounding for 3 centuries without a listener. She thought of the note on the engineer's console. Home, home, not a destination, a promise, a rhythm repeated until it became true. She turned back to Teth Soren. "What happens when all 12 wake?" The old Vali looked at her with his milky eyes. For a long moment he did not speak. Then he said, "That is the question the galaxy has been avoiding for 3 centuries. The Vorkai believe they will conquer. The conquered believes they will negotiate. And humanity," he stopped. His hands tightened on the table's edge. "Humanity believes they will wait until the waiting itself becomes the answer." Kuraz opened her eyes. She looked at the charter in his robe, at the Vorkai ship with its guns aimed, at the Resolute with its warm bridge and its wet stain. She understood something then, not as a thought but as a feeling, a pressure behind her sternum that made her breath shallow. The coffee cup was not debris. The coffee cup was a monument, a small, ordinary thing touched by human hands, left in place with the intention of return. Engineer Petrov had written, "We'll clean when we get home." He had not gotten home, but the cup remained. The stain remained. The intention remained. And intention, Kuraz realized, was the only thing that outlasted empires. She moved to her console. The Vorkai transmission was still cycling, a repeating demand for evacuation, for surrender, for the acknowledgement that the Resolute was salvage and nothing more. She ignored it. She opened a channel to Okonkwo, still inside the Resolute, still listening to a dead man's voice. Lieutenant Tethsarin is here. He has the original charter. The dormant registry is legal. The Vorkai claim is void. Okonkwo's voice came back different, younger. The weight was still there, but something else had joined it, the same thing Kuraz felt in her chest. Not hope, something older, something that had been waiting as long as the ships. Kuraz, Okonkwo said, the ship wants to show you something, the archive. Vance's final message, it's a pause, static. The tapping grew louder through the interference. It's not for me, it's for whoever found her, whoever heard the hum and didn't run. Kuraz looked at Tethsarin. The old Vali nodded. His milky eyes held something she could not name, pride, or grief, or the particular sorrow of someone who had kept a secret so long that the secret had become his only friend. Go, he said. I will hold the charter. I will hold the channel. I will hold whatever needs holding while you see what 3 centuries of silence has preserved. Kuraz pulled on her suit. It was old, patched, the seals checked more by prayer than by gauge. She cycled through her airlock and stepped into the void. The boneyard was different from outside. Without hull metal between her and the dark, the debris field became immense. A cathedral of broken ships, each one a story she would never know, each one a silence that had ended without witness. She used her suit thrusters sparingly, conserving fuel she might need for the return. The Resolute grew in her viewport, its hull scarred and dark, its dorsal shear a wound that had never healed. She found the airlock Okonkwo had used. The manual override still glowed green. She punched it and stepped inside. The corridor was warm, not cold, not dead warm. The lights flickered in a rhythm that matched the tapping from Vance's recording. The ship knew she was coming. The ship had always known. She found the bridge. Okonkwo stood beside the captain's chair, her helmet off, her face lit by console displays that showed data in a script Kuraz could not read. The coffee cup sat in its holder. The stain was still there, still wet. And on the main screen, a recording played. A man's face, young, human, with dark hair and eyes that held the particular calm of someone who had already accepted his own death. Captain Elias Vance, speaking to a future he would never see. If you are hearing this, Vance said, then the long silence has ended. You found us. You listened. You did not claim, he smiled. It was a small expression, almost shy. We built these ships not to hide, but to wait, not to fight, but to remember. The galaxy thinks we surrendered. We did not surrender. We chose a different kind of war, a war of patience, a war of presence without provocation, a war that could only be won by outlasting everyone who wanted what we had. The recording shifted. The camera angle changed. Now Vance was not alone. Behind him, a smaller figure, an engineer, gray-haired, holding the same white cup Kuraz had seen in the holder. Petrov. He raised the cup in a gesture Kuraz did not understand, then set it down on the console beside him. Petrov says the coffee's gone cold, Vance said, and there was laughter in his voice, real and warm. He says he'll clean the stain when we get home. I told him we won't be going home. He said that's fine. The stain can wait. Everything can wait if you're waiting for something worth waking up to. The recording froze. Vance's face held in the display, young and calm and dead for 3 centuries. The tapping continued beneath the silence. We are here, we remember. We wait for you. And Kuraz stood in the warm bridge of a ship that had been declared dead, looking at a coffee cup that had outlasted empires, and she felt the pressure in her chest become something else. Not fear, not awe, something that had no name in Thren or Vorkai or Vali, the feeling of having been seen, of having been waited for, of being, for the first time in her 87 years, exactly where she was supposed to be. She reached out. Her claw touched the coffee cup. The ceramic was warm. The chip on the handle fit her grip as if it had been made for something with claws rather than fingers. She lifted it from the holder and looked at the stain inside, brown, ancient, still wet after 3 centuries of darkness. She was never dead, Kuraz whispered. She was only waiting. The ship answered. The lights brightened. The tapping grew louder, then softer, then resolved into a single tone that filled the bridge and the corridors and the dark beyond the hull, a voice that was not Vance's, not Petrov's, but the ship's own. The Resolute, speaking for the first time in her own words. "Welcome home," the ship said. And Kuraz, who had pulled 214 vessels from the dark and never once been welcomed by any of them, closed her eyes and let the sound wash through her. The Vorkai could come with their guns. The conquered could debate its charters. The galaxy could forget and remember and forget again. But here, in this warm bridge, with this warm cup in her claw and this warm voice in her ears, something had survived that no petition could revoke and no gun could destroy. The waiting was over. The remembering had begun. The voice faded. The bridge held its warmth. Kuraz stood with the cup in her claw, the stain dark against the white ceramic, and she listened to the silence that came after 3 centuries of speaking. Okonkwo touched her shoulder. The gesture was human, a brief pressure, fingers curling slightly, then releasing. "We need to move," she said. "Korath won't wait for his reinforcements. He can't." Kuraz set the cup back in its holder. The chip on the handle caught the bridge light. She followed Okonkwo through the warm corridors, past the engineer's station with its faded note, past the airlock that had cycled like a dying breath, out into the void where the boneyard turned and the dead star burned and the Vorkai ship waited with its guns aimed. Teth Soren stood in the claw of evening's airlock, the charter in his hands. His milky eyes found Kuraz through her helmet visor. He did not speak. He simply held the document out in paper, ink, the original seal of a conquered that had existed before the Vorkai had reached space. Kuraz took it. The paper was warm from his body. She cycled through and used her suit thrusters, crossing the gap between her ship and the Vorkai vessel with the charter held against her chest. She did not know what she would say. She did not know if words would matter against guns. But she had pulled 214 vessels from the dark, and she had learned that some things could only be approached directly. The Vorkai airlock opened before she reached it. A gesture of contempt. They did not fear her. She was small. She was alone. She was Thren. Director Korath waited inside. His bronze carapace filled the corridor, polished to a mirror sheen that reflected her small figure back at her, feathered crest, trembling claws, oil marks on her suit gloves. His 4 vestigial mandibles clicked in sequence, a sound like filing cabinets snapping shut. "You bring paper," he said. "I have guns." "I bring proof," Kuraz said. "Your guns are aimed at a ship that is crewed. Your claim is filed against a vessel that holds a charter older than your species. The ship is debris." Korath's voice was flat, administrative, the tone of someone who had said the same thing 47 times and would say it 47 more. Debris does not speak. Debris does not warm. Debris does not hold charters. Kuraz held the document up. The seal caught the corridor light. "This is the dormant registry, filed under Section 1 of the original Conquered Charter, signed by Vali witnesses, ratified by species that no longer exist. The Resolute is not debris. The Resolute is a military vessel in active service, maintained by the Long Silence Protocol, crewed by the will of its captain and the intention of its engineer." Korath's mandibles stopped clicking. For a moment the corridor was silent. Then he reached out one forelimb, the one with the faded tattoo of the 80-year expansion mandate, and he took the charter. His 7-faceted eyes tracked across the paper. Each facet moved independently, reading different lines, different dates, different signatures. Kuraz watched him. She watched the moment when the administrative certainty began to crack, not with violence, not with shouting, but with the simple, unanswerable fact of ink on paper that predated his entire epistemology. "This is a forgery," he said, but his voice was different now, smaller. "It is the original." Teth Soren's voice came through the open channel, old and soft and patient. "I filed it myself. I watched the ships disappear. I have waited 3 centuries for someone to ask the right question. A pause. You are not asking the right question, Director. You are filing the wrong petition. Korath's mandibles twitched. He looked at the charter. He looked at Kuraz. He looked at the paper in his claw as if it were a species he had never encountered, something that could not be catalogued, numbered, filed, or claimed. The ship spoke to you, he said. Not a challenge, a question. The first question he had asked in 47 petitions. Yes. What did it say? Kuraz thought of the voice. Calm, slightly amused, ancient. She thought of the tapping beneath it, the rhythm that said, "We are here, we remember, we wait for you." She thought of the coffee cup, warm in her claw, the stain still wet after 3 centuries of darkness. It said, "Welcome back," she said, "to a captain who has been dead for 3 centuries, because the ship does not care who holds the title, the ship cares who listens." Korath was silent. The charter hung in his claw, heavy with ink and time. His guns were still aimed. His claim was still filed. But something had shifted, not in the ship, not in the charter, but in the small space between his mandibles where doubt lived, the one place no administrative system could reach. He turned. He walked back into his ship. The airlock cycled closed behind him. The channel did not reopen. Kuraz floated in the void, the charter drifting from her claws, the Vorkai vessel dark and silent before her. She did not know if Korath would file his 48th petition. She did not know if he would return with a larger ship, or if he would simply sit in his office 43 light-years away and stare at the 47 petitions on his wall and wonder which one had been wrong. She did not care. She used her thrusters and returned to the claw of evening. The Resolute remained. The second hum continued, faint and steady, somewhere beyond the debris field. The boneyard turned. The dead star burned. And in the warm bridge of a ship that had been declared dead, a white ceramic cup sat in its holder with a brown stain that had outlasted empires. Kuraz sat in her pilot's cradle. Her console was dry now. The oil had stopped secreting. The tremor had quieted. She opened a private channel, not to Cradle Point, not to the Vorkai, not to anyone who needed an answer. She opened it to the Resolute. "Thank you," she said, "for waiting." The ship did not answer. The ship had already spoken. But the console beside her cup holder, the one where Petrov had left his note, flickered once. A single light, brief and warm, like a hand raised in farewell. She kept the recording. She did not file it. She did not catalog it. She simply held it in her ship's memory, alongside the frequencies of 214 other vessels, most of them truly dead, most of them truly silent. The Resolute was different. The Resolute was the 215th, and the Resolute was not the last. The Vorkai ship departed in the night cycle. No transmission. No farewell. Simply gone, its guns cold, its claim unresolved. Kuraz watched it shrink against the stars until it was indistinguishable from the debris. Then she turned her viewport to the Resolute and she waited. Okonkwo came aboard once more before her own ship departed. She stood in Kuraz's galley, the data chip still in her hand, her eyes on the viewport. "The others," she said, "the other 11, they'll wake now, one by one, as they're found." "Yes. And when they all wake." Kuraz did not answer. She looked at the Resolute, at the warm bridge, at the coffee cup visible in the drone's last transmission, still in its holder, still stained, still waiting. She thought of Petrov's note. Home. Home. She thought of Vance's smile, young and calm and dead for 3 centuries. She thought of the tapping that had sounded in the dark without a listener, and the voice that had answered when she finally asked. "The galaxy," she said slowly, "will remember that silence is not surrender, and the Vorkai will learn that patience is not emptiness, and we," she paused. Her crest rose slightly, then settled. "We will learn that some things do not need to be claimed, only witnessed." Okonkwo nodded. She cycled through the airlock and was gone. Kuraz sat alone. The boneyard turned. The dead star burned. The second hum continued, faint and patient, somewhere in the dark beyond her viewport. She reached out and touched her console, dry now, calm, the marks of her claws still visible in the metal. She did not wipe them. She left them there, a small record of her own waiting, her own patience, her own willingness to listen where others would have claimed. She opened her log. She did not write about the charter or the Vorkai or the 47 petitions that had failed. She wrote one line in Thren's script, in the same hand her grandfather had taught her. The 215th was not salvage. The 215th was waiting, and now she is home. She closed the log. She set her ship on a slow drift, not toward the Resolute, not away from it, simply orbiting the debris field in the patient ellipse that salvage charters had followed for 6,000 years. The claw of evening was old. Her seals were patched. Her welds were her grandfather's, but she was still flying. And Kuraz, who had never belonged to anything larger than her ship, understood now that belonging was not about size. It was about listening. It was about waiting. It was about hearing a voice in the dark and choosing not to run. The coffee cup sat in the Resolute's bridge. The stain was still there. Kuraz saw it herself on the drone camera, a dark mark on pale metal, 3 centuries old. They never got home, but the stain remained. And somewhere in the dark beyond the boneyard, another ship was humming. Another voice was waiting. Another captain was coming back. The signal came from a ship that wasn't supposed to exist.